Sign it." Daniel Brooks dropped the papers onto the table without looking at his wife. "We're done, Emma. You were never going to be enough for this family, and honestly, you never were." Victoria smirked from the corner. Lauren held up her phone, already recording. Sophia sat beside Daniel like she'd already moved in. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow Emma's story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The divorce papers landed on the dining table at 7:14 in the morning. Emma Carter knew they were coming. She had known for weeks, maybe longer than that if she was being honest with herself. There had been signs, the silences at dinner that stretched too long to be comfortable, the phone calls Daniel took in the garage with the door closed, the way Victoria, his mother, had started looking at Emma like she was furniture that had been rearranged into the wrong room. But knowing something is coming and actually watching it arrive in front of you are two completely different experiences. And Emma stood at the edge of the kitchen, still holding her coffee cup, and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I had my attorney draw those up last week," Daniel said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was checking something on his phone, scrolling with his thumb like this was any other morning. "Everything's already divided. You keep your car, I keep the house. There's a settlement number on page 4. My attorney says it's more than fair given the length of the marriage. 7 years. That was the length of the marriage. 7 years, and he summarized it in a single sentence and a page number." Emma set her coffee cup down on the counter. She was surprised her hand was steady. "When did you decide this?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Daniel finally looked up from his phone, and what she saw in his face was not anger, not guilt, not even the mild discomfort she might have expected from a man who was ending a 7-year marriage over breakfast. What she saw was impatience. He was impatient, like she was a meeting running long and he had somewhere else to be. "Emma." He said her name the way you say a word you've repeated so many times it loses meaning. "We've been doing this for years, the pretending, the going through the motions. You know as well as I do that this stopped working a long time ago." "I didn't know that," she said quietly. "I didn't know that at all." He made a sound in the back of his throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, but something in between. "That's exactly the problem." She heard movement behind her and turned. Victoria was already in the dining room, sitting at the head of the table like she'd been there for hours. Emma had not heard her come in. She had not known Victoria was in the house at all. That fact alone, that Daniel had given his mother a key and not told her, settled into Emma's chest like a stone. "Good morning, Emma," Victoria said. Her voice was pleasant, the way a well-polished knife is pleasant smooth on the surface designed to cut. She was dressed as though she had somewhere important to be afterward, which she probably did. Victoria Brooks never went anywhere without a destination. "I think this is the right decision for everyone. I hope you understand that." "I wasn't asking for your opinion," Emma said. Victoria smiled. "You never do, dear. That's always been part of the problem." Emma turned back to Daniel. "You had her here for this. She's my mother. She's not your wife." "No," Daniel said, and he finally put his phone down. "And you barely were either. Be honest with yourself, Emma. When's the last time you contributed anything real to this family? You work retail. You come home smelling like polyester and floor cleaner. My mother has been asking for 3 years when you were going to do something with yourself, and every single time I covered for you. Every single time I told her you were figuring things out. But you weren't figuring anything out, were you? You were just existing, just taking up space." The words hit her like something physical. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because he said them so easily, without hesitation, without any of the softness that had once been the whole reason she loved him. "That's not fair," she said. "Life isn't fair. You should know that by now." The sound of heels on hardwood came from the hallway, and then Lauren appeared in the doorway, Daniel's younger sister, 26 years old, and as sharp as their mother, holding her phone at chest height. Emma noticed immediately that the camera was on. "Lauren," she said flatly. "Don't mind me," Lauren said, smiling. "Just documenting." "Documenting what exactly?" "Closure." Lauren shrugged one shoulder. "Danny deserves to have this on record. You've been holding him back for years, Emma. The whole family knows it. Now he's finally doing what he should have done a long time ago." Emma looked at Lauren's phone at the little red dot blinking in the corner of the screen, and she thought about all the things she could say. There were so many of them. They were stacked up behind her teeth like a wall pressing forward. But she had learned something important over the years, not from Daniel, not from Victoria or Lauren, but from herself, from the quieter version of herself that she had spent so long protecting. She had learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people waiting for you to fall apart is to not fall apart. She looked at the camera. She looked at Lauren. And then she looked away. "Is there anyone else?" Emma asked. Her voice was completely steady. "Anyone else you'd like to invite to watch this?" The door opened. Emma turned. Sophia walked in. She was beautiful in the calculated way that some women cultivate every detail, chosen nothing accidental. She was wearing Daniel's college sweatshirt, which told Emma everything she needed to know about how long this had been going on, and how comfortable Sophia had already made herself in a life that technically still belonged to Emma. "Oh," Sophia said, as though she hadn't expected Emma to still be there, as though Emma's presence in her own home was the inconvenience. "Sorry, I didn't realize you two were still talking." Emma looked at Daniel. Daniel did not look away. He did not have the decency to look ashamed. "Sophia," he said, "it's fine. Emma was just going to sign the papers." "I haven't said I was going to sign anything," Emma said. "Emma!" Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade through butter. "Be realistic. What exactly are you holding on to here? The house. It's in Daniel's name, the bank account. He's already spoken to the attorney. The marriage." She paused, and the pause was deliberate, designed to wound. "Look around this room, dear. This marriage has been over for a long time. The only one who didn't get the memo was you." The silence that followed was the kind that presses on your eardrums. Emma stood in the center of it, and she breathed, and she looked at every single face in that room. Her husband, who had once told her she was the only good thing he'd ever done. His mother, who had never once said a kind word to her and meant it. His sister filming her humiliation for an audience Emma would never see, and the woman he had chosen instead, and she felt something happen inside her chest. Not breaking, something closer to the opposite of breaking, something settling. "Fine," Emma said. She walked to the table. She picked up the pen that was already there. Of course there was already a pen. Of course Daniel had thought of that, and she turned to the last page. She signed her name. She signed it clearly, confidently, without hesitation, the way you sign something when you know exactly what you're doing and why. She put the pen down. She looked at Daniel. "You think this is the end," she said, not unkindly, almost gently. "You think you're letting something small go." He stared at her. She picked up her coffee cup from the counter. She had never put it down for long, and she walked to the door. She did not look at Sophia. She did not look at Lauren or the blinking red dot. She did not look at Victoria. She walked out of the dining room through the hallway and out the front door of the house she had spent 3 years helping to furnish, decorate, and make feel like something worth coming home to. She sat in her car. She put both hands on the steering wheel. She looked at the windshield for a long moment, and then she drove away. What none of them saw, what none of them would understand until much later, when it was far too late to change anything, was that Emma Carter wasn't driving toward something small. She wasn't driving toward a sad, quiet life in a studio apartment with a broken lease and a retail name tag and no future worth mentioning. She was driving toward something none of them had ever bothered to look for, because they had made up their minds about her before they ever truly looked. They had looked at her and seen ordinary. They had never once asked what was underneath. Emma had grown up knowing exactly who she was. The problem, or rather the deliberate choice, was that she had decided at 24 years old that she did not want to be defined by the answer. Her father's name was William Carter. If you had said that name in any boardroom in America, in most boardrooms in Europe, in financial circles in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Dubai, you would have watched heads turn. William Carter had built one of the most quietly powerful business dynasties in the country, not through spectacle, but through precision. Technology, long-horizon investments, infrastructure, pharmaceutical partnerships. He did not appear on magazine covers often because he did not need to. He had learned long ago that the people who needed to know who he was already did, and the people who didn't know didn't matter to him. I had one daughter, Emma. Emma, who had sat across from him at 24 years old and told him she wanted to leave. Not forever, not in anger, but she wanted to know, she needed to know whether she could build something real, something true, something that belonged to her because she had earned it. Whether the people she loved would love her back without the name. William Carter had looked at his daughter for a long time, and then he had said, "You have your mother's stubbornness." Her mother had died when Emma was 9. Emma considered it a compliment. He had agreed to her terms, both of them. He would not interfere. He would not announce her. He would let her live exactly as she chose. and in return she would stay connected to him quietly, through monthly phone calls, through occasional visits that were never photographed and never announced. She had chosen a new city, a new social circle. She had used her mother's maiden name on forms that didn't require legal documentation, and kept Carter for the documents that did. She had worked retail, truly worked at long shifts, difficult customers' aching feet, the particular exhaustion of being chronically underestimated by people who assumed that if you were working a register, you had nothing better to offer the world. She had met Daniel in that city. He had been charming. She had to give him that. Daniel Brooks in his early 30s was genuinely compellingly charming, the kind of man who made you feel in the first hour of knowing him that you were the most interesting person he had ever encountered. He had ambitions. He had ideas. He talked about the future the way architects talk about blueprints, with specificity, with passion, with the infectious confidence of someone who truly believes the building is already halfway done. Emma had been drawn to that. She had grown up surrounded by people who already had everything, and there was something bracingly alive about someone who was in the process of building toward something who still had the hunger. She had fallen in love with him before she fully understood who he was. By the time she understood, she had already chosen to stay. That was her mistake, and she knew it. Not loving him, she didn't regret that even now, but staying past the point where the charm became a cover for something less flattering. Past the point where ambition started shading into entitlement, past the point where his belief that he deserved more started to include the unspoken implication that Emma was part of what he deserved more than. She had told herself for years that she was helping him, and she had been financially, emotionally, practically. When his first startup failed, Emma paid the outstanding invoices with savings she had built carefully from paychecks that were genuinely hers. When his second idea didn't get off the ground, she encouraged him without making him feel small. When Victoria started coming around more, started making comments about the house and Emma's career choices, and whether Daniel wouldn't be better positioned if he were with someone from a family with connections, Emma had bitten down on every response she wanted to give and focused on keeping the marriage functional. She had been loyal. That was the truest thing she could say about herself in those 7 years. She had been relentlessly, sometimes exhaustingly loyal. And this morning he had handed her a pen and told her to sign, so she had. She drove to her new apartment. She had already arranged it 2 weeks earlier, when she finally allowed herself to accept what was coming. And she carried 2 bags upstairs and sat on the floor of the empty living room because she hadn't bought furniture yet, and she called the one person she called when things became too large to hold alone. Her best friend Claire. Claire and Gwyn had known Emma for 6 years, knew the whole shape of her life, the retail job and the difficult marriage, and the mother-in-law who had never once made Emma feel welcome. What Claire did not know, what almost no one in Emma's life from the last 8 years knew, was the Carter part, the William part, the Empire part. She filmed it, Emma said when Claire picked up. Lauren stood there with her phone and filmed the whole thing. "Are you serious?" She called it documenting closure. "I will end her." Claire. "I'm serious, Emma, give me an address." Emma almost laughed. "Almost. I signed the papers." A pause. "How do you feel?" Emma thought about it, really thought about it the way she had trained herself to think about things honestly, without flattering herself, and without tearing herself down unnecessarily. "Like I just put down something incredibly heavy," she said. "Good heavy or bad heavy? I don't know yet." They talked for an hour. Claire cried a little, which Emma found oddly comforting. She talked through the whole morning, Daniel's voice, Victoria's smile, Sophia in the sweatshirt, Lauren and the phone. Claire listened the way only a person who has known you long enough to love you without reservation can listen without trying to fix things before you've finished explaining them. When Emma finally went quiet, Claire said, "What do you need?" "Time," Emma said. "Just a little time." She got 3 days. 3 days to settle into the apartment, to buy a mattress and a coffee maker and a set of plates from a discount home goods store, to wake up in a quiet that was different from the strained silences of the house she'd left, to let the mornings be still and uncomplicated. On the 4th day, her phone rang. She did not recognize the number, but the area code was her father's city. She answered. "Miss Carter." A man's voice, professional, measured with the carefully neutral tone of someone trained not to convey urgency in a way that causes panic. "My name is Richard Hollis. I'm Dr. Paulson's assistant at Mercy General. Your father asked us to reach you. He was admitted early this morning." Emma was standing in her kitchen. She did not remember sitting down, but she was sitting when she said, "How serious?" "He's stable," Richard said quickly, "but Dr. Paulson would like to speak with you in person when you arrive, if that's possible." "I'll be there tomorrow morning," Emma said. She hung up, and she sat for a moment in the quiet of her small new apartment with its mattress and its coffee maker and its second-hand plates, and she felt the world she had carefully constructed beginning to shift beneath her, not collapsing, not falling, but turning, rotating towards something she had been postponing for 8 years. She booked a flight for 6 in the morning. She packed one bag. She did not call Claire because she did not yet know what to say. She did not call anyone. She sat with the knowledge alone the way she had sat with so many difficult things over the years, and she breathed through it until it became something she could carry. Her father was in the hospital. She was going home. She did not know what she was going home to, but she understood in that quiet, certain way that some things make themselves understood without requiring words that something was ending. And something else, something she hadn't planned for, hadn't mapped out or strategized or prepared, was about to begin. She left the lights on when she left. For the first time in 8 years, Emma Carter was not walking away from something. She was walking toward it. And the woman she had spent those years becoming the woman who had signed papers without flinching, who had walked through a room of people who underestimated her without surrendering a single inch of her dignity, who had paid her own bills and built her own friendships, and loved as genuinely as any human being is capable of loving, that woman was coming with her. All the way, without apology, without hesitation, without hiding. The flight took 2 hours and 40 minutes, and Emma spent most of it with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the window watching clouds pass beneath her like something soft being pulled apart. She had not slept. She had tried somewhere over the mountain range, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dining table, the pen, the papers, and then immediately after, as though her brain refused to let her rest in one grief before handing her another, she saw her phone screen and the words, "Mercy General," and the careful professional voice of a man named Richard, telling her that her father had been admitted. 2 things ending at the same time, or maybe 2 things beginning. She wasn't sure yet which framing was more accurate. The hospital was large and quiet in the way that hospitals are always quiet, not truly silent, but padded, muffled the sounds of a building full of difficult things being managed carefully. Emma told the front desk her name and watched the nurse's expression shift almost imperceptibly, a small, controlled adjustment, like a person who has been told to expect someone important and is trying not to show that they know it. "Mr. Carter is on this 4th floor, the nurse said. "Dr. Paulson asked to speak with you first if you don't mind waiting just a moment." "I don't mind," Emma said. Dr. Paulson was a tall woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the kind of direct, unhurried eye contact that Emma associated with people who had delivered enough difficult news to understand that looking away doesn't make it easier. She shook Emma's hand with both of hers. "Your father is stable," she said, leading Emma down the corridor. "He had a cardiac event 4 days ago, minor comparatively, but at his age and given his history, we want to be cautious. He's been asking for you since yesterday morning." "He called me himself 4 days ago," Emma said, "through his assistant." Dr. Paulson nodded, not surprised. "That sounds right. He was very specific about who he wanted contacted and in what order. You were first." Emma absorbed that without responding. "He's alert," the doctor continued. "He's frustrated with being here, which is honestly a good sign. He's been trying to review documents from his hospital bed, and we've had to ask his team to limit what they bring him." A pause. "He's a difficult patient." "He's a difficult everything," Emma said, and Dr. Paulson smiled. The room was private and large, and William Carter was sitting up in bed when Emma walked in, reading something on a tablet with his glasses pushed low on his nose. He looked older than she remembered. That was the first thing she registered, and it landed with a weight she hadn't expected, not because she was surprised she knew time moved. She knew he was 71 years old, but because the last image she held of him in her mind was from 14 months ago, when he had looked exactly like the man she had grown up knowing. Solid, immovable, the kind of man who seemed to exist outside of ordinary time. He looked up when she came in. He put the tablet down. "You look tired," he said. "Hello, Dad," Emma said. "Sit down. You look like you've been traveling since yesterday." "Since this morning." She sat in the chair beside his bed. "Your assistant called me 4 days after you were admitted. I didn't want to worry you. Dad, you had a heart attack." "A cardiac event," he corrected with the particular precision of a man who had been corrected by a doctor and was now correcting everyone else. "There's a distinction. Not one that made me feel better when I found out." I was quiet for a moment looking at her. Not the way most people looked at her, assessing, categorizing, deciding what she was worth based on what they could see. William Carter looked at his daughter the way he looked at everything he considered genuinely important, slowly, completely, with the full weight of his attention. "You signed the papers," he said. Emma went still. "How do you know about that?" "Emma." He said her name simply, without apology. "I told you 8 years ago I wouldn't interfere. I never said I wouldn't know." She stared at him for a moment, and the feeling that moved through her was complicated. Not anger exactly, but something adjacent to it. A bristling. "You've been watching. I've been your father. Those aren't the same thing as interfering. They're pretty close. I never contacted Daniel. I never contacted his mother. I never made a single move that would have given you an advantage you didn't earn yourself." He met her eyes steadily. "I watched because I love you, Emma, not because I was managing you." She sat with that for a moment. "He had his mother there," she said finally, "and his sister, and the woman he was replacing me with. They were all in the dining room when I came downstairs." William's jaw tightened, just barely. "I know. Lauren filmed it." Something crossed his face, then a flash of something that was not the controlled, composed expression he wore in board meetings or business negotiations, but something rawer than that, something a father looks like when someone has humiliated his child. "Emma," he said, "I'm fine, Dad. I know you're fine. You've always been fine. That's never been what I worried about." He paused. "Sit with me a while." She stayed for 3 hours. They talked the way they had always talked, when it was just the two of them directly, without the social lubricant that most people use to make conversation comfortable, because neither of them had ever particularly needed it. He asked about her apartment, her work, the details of her life over the last year that he knew in outline, but not in texture. She told him about Claire, about the particular rhythm she had found in her days, about the things she had learned about herself in 7 years of living as someone no one looked twice at. He listened the way he always listened, which was to say completely. It was in the second hour, while they were talking about something else entirely, she couldn't remember afterward what had started it, that he said, "I want to talk to you about the foundation." Emma looked at him. "Okay." "And the company." He took his glasses off, folded them, set them on the bedside table. "Richard has been managing more than he should be. He's capable, he's loyal, but the board has started asking questions I can't answer from a hospital bed." He looked at her. "I need you to come home, Emma." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of something important being said out loud for the first time, taking up the space it required. "Dad," she said carefully, "we talked about this. We talked about it 8 years ago. The situation has changed, because you're in the hospital. Because I'm 71 years old, and I had a cardiac event 4 days ago, and I have spent the better part of a decade watching you prove every single thing I already knew about you. You don't need to prove anything else." He leaned forward slightly. "I need you. The company needs you. Not because you're a Carter, though you are, and that matters, but because of what you became when no one was watching." Emma stood up. She walked to the window, not to look at anything in particular, but because she needed to move. Because what he was saying was rearranging something inside her, and rearrangement requires space. "I don't know anything about running a corporation," she said. "You know more than you think. You've spent 7 years managing everything in a marriage that wasn't working on a budget that required actual accounting for a man who gave you nothing in return. That's not nothing, Emma. That's a masterclass in resource management under pressure. That's not the same as... I'm not saying it's identical. I'm saying the instincts are there, the team is there, the infrastructure is there." He paused. "What's been missing is you." She turned back to face him. She looked at her father, at the man who had built an empire and also driven her to her first day of school, who had negotiated international contracts and also sat beside her hospital bed when she had her appendix out at 12 years old, who was both more and less than the word father could fully contain, and she felt the full weight of what he was asking. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," he said. "But Emma..." He held her eyes. "You've already made the hard choices. Leaving. Staying quiet. Loving someone who didn't see you. Signing those papers this week. All of that, those were the hard choices. This one isn't." He settled back against the pillows. "This one is just going home." She thought about that on the drive from the hospital to the hotel room she'd booked. She thought about it through room service dinner she barely tasted, and a hot shower that lasted too long. She sat on the edge of the bed afterward, and she let herself really feel the full shape of the moment she was in the marriage over the apartment. Empty her father in a hospital, asking her to come back, 7 years of choices arranged around her, like the aftermath of something that had finally detonated. She called Claire. "Okay," she said when Claire picked up. "I need to tell you something." Should I be sitting down? Probably. A pause. Emma, you're scaring me. I'm not trying to, she breathed. My name isn't just Emma. I mean it is. But Carter is also my real name, my actual name. My father is William Carter. Silence. Claire. I'm processing, Claire said in a very controlled voice. Okay. William Carter. Yes. As in William Carter who... Claire stopped. Started again. Emma, I Googled him once when you said your last name was Carter like 3 years ago, because Carter is a name that makes you Google it, and I convinced myself it was too crazy to be real. It's real. Your father is worth... Claire. He's worth more than the GDP of several small countries, Emma. I know. And you worked retail. I chose to. For 8 years. I know. Daniel Brooks. Claire's voice cracked. Not with grief. With something that sounded a lot like the particular rage of a best friend who has just learned that someone underestimated the person they love most. Daniel Brooks called you ordinary. He did. Emma. Claire's voice dropped lower. He called you ordinary, and your father is William Carter, and he was there with his mother and his sister and his girlfriend, and they all... Claire. Emma said it firmly, but not unkindly. I need you to help me think, not spiral. A beat. You're right. Sorry. Okay. The sound of Claire composing herself. What are you going to do? I think, Emma said slowly, that I'm going to go home. She flew back to her apartment first, because there were things to handle her landlord, her manager at the store, the practical architecture of a life being carefully dismantled. She gave 2 weeks' notice at work on a Tuesday morning, and her manager, a kind woman named Sandra, who had always treated Emma like she was capable of more than the job required, looked at her across the break room table and said, Is everything okay? It's better than okay, Emma said honestly. I think things are actually finally getting sorted out. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. You were always too good for this place, she said quietly, and Emma felt that land somewhere soft and important. Not because it was about status, it wasn't. Sandra didn't know anything about William Carter, but because it was someone who had watched her work, who had seen her show up every day and do things well and treat people decently, saying, I saw you. She packed her apartment into 7 boxes. That was everything 7 boxes because she had lived lightly by design, and the furniture was mostly second-hand things. She left for the next tenant with a note on the kitchen counter. She was in her car, the 7 boxes in the back, when her phone rang. Unknown number, same area code as before. She pulled over. Miss Carter. Not Richard this time. A woman. My name is Patricia Lane. I'm the head of communications for Carter Enterprises. Your father asked me to reach out and coordinate the logistics of your return. We want to make sure your first day is... Patricia, Emma said. Yes. I don't need a coordinated arrival. I just need a parking pass and a badge. A pause. Of course. Yes, we can do that. And I want to meet with the board within the first week. Not to make any announcements, just to listen. I want to understand what's been happening before I say anything. Yes. That's absolutely something we can arrange. Good. Emma put the car in drive. I'll be there Thursday. She arrived on Thursday. Carter Enterprises occupied 3 floors of a downtown building and the entirety of 2 other properties in the city, but the headquarters, the main offices where her father had his corner suite, and where the board convened, and where the real decisions happened, was in a building she had visited as a child, had walked through holding her father's hand, had watched with the wide-eyed comprehension of a kid who understood that this was important, without yet fully grasping how or why. Patricia met her in the lobby with a badge and a parking pass as requested, and nothing else. No press, no announcement, no row of executives lined up to make an impression. Emma had been specific about that, and she was grateful Patricia had taken her seriously. Your father called this morning, Patricia said, walking her toward the elevator. He wanted me to tell you to eat something before your 9 o'clock. Tell him to focus on his own meals, Emma said. Patricia smiled. I'll pass that along. The 9 o'clock meeting was with Richard Hollis, the same man who had called her from the hospital, who turned out in person to be a compact, efficient man in his late 40s, with a handshake that was firm without being performative. He had managed the company's operations in William's absence, with the particular competence of someone who was very good at their job, and also very aware that the job was not technically his. He walked her through everything. Financials, partnerships, the state of 3 separate initiatives that were in various stages of development, personnel issues that needed decisions, a legal matter involving a subsidiary that had been on hold pending William's return to active management. He presented information the way experienced people present information clearly, without condescension, watching her face to calibrate how much she was absorbing. She absorbed all of it. When he finished, there was a pause, and he looked at her with something that wasn't quite assessment, because it was more respectful than that, but was in the same territory. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He considered his answer carefully. Someone who would need more time to get oriented. "I'll need time," she said. "I'm not pretending I know everything about this company yet, but I understand how organizations work, and I understand how money works, and I understand people." She held his gaze. "Start there and build forward. That's always worked for me." He nodded slowly. "I think that'll work here too." It was in the third week after the board meetings, after the one-on-one sessions with every department head, after she had read enough internal documentation to understand the actual shape of the company, rather than just its public face, that she found the Carter Foundation files. She had known the foundation existed. Her father had mentioned it in general terms over the years, a charitable arm, philanthropic commitments, community investments. What she had not known was the scope. The Carter Foundation funded 47 programs across 11 states. Education initiatives in underserved communities, healthcare access programs in rural areas where hospital infrastructure had collapsed over the previous decade, environmental restoration projects in 3 river systems, workforce development programs designed specifically for people over 50 who had been displaced by industrial changes and couldn't get hired back into the economy they had spent their lives building. Emma sat with those files for 3 hours. She thought about Sandra, her manager at the retail store. She thought about the people she had worked alongside for years, the women in their 60s who worked the floor because they had to, because their pensions had evaporated or their husbands had left, or the world had simply rearranged itself in ways that hadn't included them. She thought about what it felt like to be invisible, not because you were hiding like she had been, but because no one had bothered to look. She picked up her phone and called her father. "The foundation," she said when he answered. "I wondered when you'd get there." His voice was stronger than it had been in the hospital. He was home now, recovering, being difficult with his home nursing staff in the same way he'd been difficult with the hospital nurses. "What do you think?" "I think it's the most important thing this company does," she said. "I think it's underfunded relative to the revenue we're generating, and I think whoever's been running it has been playing it safe in a way that doesn't match what it could actually do." A pause. "I've been waiting 8 years," William Carter said, "for you to say something like that. Don't be smug about it, Dad." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh since she arrived, and it sounded like something coming back to life. She was at her desk on a Friday afternoon, her 4th week, the desk already covered in the particular organized chaos of someone who processes information physically in stacks and printed pages and annotated margins, when Patricia knocked and leaned in. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Patricia said. "I just wanted to flag something." She held a printed page out. "Daniel Brooks called the main line this morning. He asked to speak with you." Emma looked up from what she was reading. She looked at the page Patricia was holding. She looked at the name. She did not feel what she might have expected to feel, not the old hurt, not the anger she had set down when she drove away from that dining table, not even satisfaction, which would have been the most human response to a man who had called her worthless, now asking for a callback. She felt something quieter than all of those things. "How did he get this number?" she asked. "He may have seen the announcement," Patricia said carefully. Emma frowned. "What announcement?" Patricia's expression shifted a small controlled adjustment, the same one the nurse at the hospital had made when Emma gave her name. "Your father made a statement to the business press last week, announcing your role officially." She paused. "It ran in 3 national publications." Emma sat back in her chair. Her father, who had agreed 8 years ago that he would not announce her, had apparently decided that the terms of their agreement had a natural expiration date, and that expiration date was apparently last Tuesday. She was going to have a conversation with him about that. But right now, she was looking at Daniel's name on a printed page, and she was thinking about a dining room table and a pen and a woman in a college sweatshirt and a blinking red dot on a phone camera. "Tell him I'm not available," Emma said, "and if he calls again." Emma returned her attention to the documents in front of her. "Tell him the same thing." Patricia nodded, started to leave. "Patricia." "Yes." Emma looked up. "Make sure the foundation meeting is on the calendar for Monday. I want the full program team there, all of them. I'll confirm it today." "Thank you." Patricia left, and Emma sat alone in the quiet of her office, and she breathed, and she let the moment be exactly what it was. Not triumphant, not victorious in any performed sense, just real. Just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a woman who had been called worthless, now sitting at the center of something worth more than anyone in that dining room could have imagined. Daniel had called, and Emma had not flinched, had not reached for the phone, had not felt the pull of the old life that she had signed away one calm morning with a steady hand. She had simply said not available, and then she had gone back to work, because there was so much of it, and because for the first time in a very long time, it was all hers. Daniel called 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. Emma knew this because Patricia told her briefly and without editorial comment each time it happened. The third call came through the foundation's main line, which meant he had done some research or had someone do it for him and had found a second number to try when the first one kept getting the same answer. The fourth call came to her cell phone, which she did not answer and which she stared at for the 3 seconds it took to send to voicemail. She did not listen to the voicemail. She deleted it the same evening the way you clear something from a counter that doesn't belong there. What she did instead was work. She worked the way she had worked at everything she had ever taken seriously, with her full attention, with the unglamorous, unremarkable consistency that most people mistake for talent when they watch someone who has it. She was in the office by 7:45 every morning. She read everything. She asked questions she already halfway knew the answers to, because the real information was never in the answer. It was in how the person gave it, what they chose to emphasize, what they left out, what they looked like when they thought she wasn't paying close attention. She was always paying close attention. The board had expected her to be ornamental. She understood that without anyone saying it. She was William Carter's daughter, which in their minds meant she was a symbol, a continuity gesture, something to put on a letterhead to reassure investors, while the real decisions continued to be made by the people who had always made them. She had clocked that expectation in the first board meeting, in the way certain members had smiled at her, with the particular warmth reserved for things that do not need to be taken seriously, and she had filed it away without reacting to it. She had learned that from her years of invisibility. When people underestimate you, you don't correct them, you let them. And then you do the thing they thought you couldn't do, and you do it so well that the correction makes itself. By the end of her 5th week, she had restructured the foundation's budget, allocating $12 million in additional annual funding across 4 of the 11 program areas she had identified as critically underfunded. She had done it methodically with a memo that laid out the reasoning with the kind of specificity that left no room for dismissal. And she had presented it to the foundation board on a Monday morning, without apology and without the softening language that women in rooms like that are habitually expected to use. One of the board members, a man named Gerald Oakes, who was 70 years old and had been on the foundation board for 22 of them and wore his seniority like a flag, looked at the memo and then looked at Emma and said, "This is a significant reallocation. Your father never moved this much in a single quarter." "My father was building from the ground up," Emma said. "We're not at the ground anymore. We have the resources, Gerald. The only question is whether we're willing to use them." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Have you reviewed the tax implications of moving this quickly?" "I have the analysis from our accounting team in the folder behind the memo," she said. Tab 3. He opened his folder. He went quiet. The meeting ended with the reallocation approved. Patricia was waiting in the hallway when Emma came out holding 2 coffees and wearing an expression that was trying very hard to be professionally neutral and not quite succeeding. "Gerald Oakes has never voted yes in a board meeting in under 20 minutes, Patricia said, handing Emma her cup. "It took 28 minutes, Emma said. "For Gerald, that's a standing ovation." Emma took the coffee. "What's next?" What was next was a call from a journalist named Marcus Webb, who wrote for a national business publication and had filed 3 interview requests through the communications office in the past month. Patricia had managed him politely and evasively, buying time the way good communications professionals buy time, without technically saying no, without technically saying yes, without ever giving the journalist enough to write anything that wasn't sanctioned. Emma reviewed his previous work one evening. He was good. Not a flatterer, not a sensationalist, the kind of writer who found the real story inside the official story and wrote it the way it actually happened, rather than the way people wanted it to look. She respected that. She had spent enough years living the actual version of things, while other people told the polished version, to know which one mattered more. She told Patricia to schedule the interview for the following Thursday. Patricia looked surprised. "Are you sure it's still early? You haven't been in the role long enough for to book it," Emma said. "Thursday afternoon, 1 hour in the office." "Okay." And don't give him anything beforehand. No background material, no prepared talking points. I want the conversation to happen the way conversations actually happen. Patricia booked it. The call with her father that evening was short and productive. He was improving. His doctors had cleared him for 3 hours of work per day, which William had immediately interpreted as permission to work 6, and he called her most evenings to exchange information that felt like business, but was also underneath the surface, the two of them rebuilding the daily texture of a relationship that had operated at distance for 8 years. "Gerald Oakes called me," William said. "Of course he did. He said you ran the best foundation board meeting he's attended in 15 years. He said that to you. He said the closest thing to that which from Gerald is the same thing." A pause. "I'm proud of you, Emma." She was quiet for a moment. The words landed somewhere they were allowed to land in that space she kept for things that were genuinely true. "Don't get sentimental, Dad," she said. "Too late," he said entirely unapologetically, and she laughed. What she didn't tell him not yet was that Daniel had called the cell phone again. This time he had also texted. She had read the text because deleting without reading felt like a choice she was making from fear, and she had never made choices from fear. It said, "Emma, please. I know you don't owe me anything. I just need 5 minutes, please." She put the phone face down on the desk. She did not respond. She did not delete it either. It sat there in her messages like a small stone, not heavy enough to weigh her down, but present enough to remind her that the past was real and that it had a gravitational pull she was going to have to account for, not by going back to it but by understanding exactly why she wasn't. The Thursday interview happened at 1 in the afternoon. Marcus Webb was younger than she had imagined from his writing early 40s, with the attentive stillness of someone who has made listening into a professional skill. He set a small recorder on the table between them, asked if that was all right. And when she nodded, he sat back and looked at her with an openness that was clearly also a technique, because open spaces invite people to fill them. Emma had spent 7 years in a marriage with someone who talked to fill space. She had learned to be comfortable with quiet. She let the quiet sit for a moment. Then she said, "What do you actually want to know, Marcus? Not what's in the request your office filed. What do you actually want to understand?" He smiled. A real one. What it looks like when someone walks away from everything and then walks back. "That's a better question," she said. They talked for 90 minutes. She told him about leaving, not about why not the Carter Foundation, or the dynasty, or any of the specifics that were public record, but the feeling of it, the decision to know herself outside the name. She told him what she had learned in the years of retail floors and ordinary mornings and friendships built without the scaffolding of a family fortune. She told him about her father in the hospital and what he had said about going home. She did not tell him about Daniel. She did not tell him about the dining table or the papers or the woman in the college sweatshirt. Some things are not for journalists, not because they're shameful, but because they're private, and Emma had come to understand that privacy was not the same as hiding. She had stopped hiding, but she didn't owe everyone the whole story. Marcus published the piece the following Monday. It ran under the headline, "The Heir Who Disappeared and What She Learned While She Was Gone." It was exactly as good as his other work, thorough, honest, the kind of profile that made a person real rather than mythological. Emma read it once on a Tuesday morning and then set it aside. Her phone started ringing significantly more after that. She was on the phone with the director of one of the Foundation's education programs, a woman named Dr. Anita Washington, who ran after-school initiatives in 4 cities and was the kind of person Emma had always respected most, a person who worked on real problems with real consequences for real people. When Patricia appeared in the doorway and made the small, controlled hand gesture that meant something was happening that needed attention, Emma held up one finger. She finished her conversation with Anita, scheduled a site visit for the following month, and hung up. "What is it?" she asked. "Daniel Brooks," Patricia said. "He's in the lobby." Emma was quiet. "He came in person," Patricia continued. "He gave the receptionist his name and asked to be announced. I wanted to talk to you before she called up." Emma stood. She walked to her desk and picked up the glass of water there and drank from it because sometimes you need 5 seconds and a mundane physical action before you respond to something. "How does he look?" she asked. Patricia hesitated. Honest answer, always. Like someone who hasn't been sleeping, and like someone who drove a long way and is trying very hard not to look like he did. Emma set the glass down. She thought about the dining table. She thought about the pen. She thought about Victoria at the head of the table, and Lauren and the camera and Sophia in the sweatshirt. She thought about the 7 years she had given this man the money, the patience, the loyalty, the particular exhaustion of loving someone who had decided what she was worth before he ever truly knew her. She thought about all of that, and she breathed through it, and she made a decision. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes, she said. "Have him wait in the small conference room off the lobby, not up here." Patricia nodded. "Do you want anyone else in the room?" "No," Emma said. "I'll do this alone." She took 10 minutes, not because she needed to compose herself. She was already composed. That had been true since the morning she walked out of the house. But because she had learned long ago that the way you enter a room is a statement, and she wanted her statement to be clear. She went downstairs. Daniel was standing when she walked in, which told her he was nervous. He sat when people were confident and stood when they were anxious, and she knew that about him the way you know things about a person after 7 years of sleeping beside them. He looked, as Patricia had said, like someone who hadn't slept. He also looked like someone who had arrived prepared for a version of this meeting that was not going to happen because the version he had prepared for involved a certain Emma, the one he had dismissed, the one he had underestimated, and that Emma had not come downstairs. The woman who came downstairs was wearing her work clothes, which were simple but precise, and her expression, which was open and steady, and owed him absolutely nothing. "Emma," he said. "Daniel," she said. She sat. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." He sat. She looked at him and said nothing. She let him begin because it was his meeting he had come to her, he had driven. However far he had driven, he had walked into her lobby and given the receptionist his name. Whatever needed to be said was his to start. He said, "I know I don't deserve to be here." "Okay," she said. "I've been calling. I know you know that." "I know." He looked at his hands. "I saw the article." "A lot of people did." "Emma." He looked up. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." "If I had known—" "Stop there," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was clear. "Hear what you just said. If you had known. That's the problem, Daniel. That's the entire problem right there in that sentence." She looked at him steadily. "You're telling me that if you had known I was a Carter, things would have been different. But what you don't understand, what I don't think you've let yourself understand yet, is that things should have been exactly the same either way." He stared at her. "I was the same person," she said, "every single day for 7 years. I worked, I contributed, I supported you through every failure and every plan and everything you told me you were going to build. I was loyal to you in ways I didn't have to be, and in ways that cost me things I'm still accounting for. And you decided what I was worth before you ever really looked at me." She paused. "Finding out my last name doesn't change any of that. It just makes the mistake clearer." I was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "You're right. I know. I treated you like you were—" He stopped, started again. "I let my mother make me believe that value was about connections and status, and—" He stopped again. "I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it." Emma looked at him. She looked at him the way she had always been able to look at people clearly, without flinching, without the softening filters most people use to protect themselves from what they actually see. She saw a man who was genuinely sorry. She also saw that his genuine sorrow was not the same thing as genuine change, because sorrow is a feeling, and change is a practice, and feelings can be real and still be insufficient. "What happened with Sophia?" she asked. He exhaled. "She left. About 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She said I wasn't who she thought I was." A short, humorless sound. "Turns out I wasn't." "What happened with the startup?" "Over. We ran out of runway and the investors pulled out." He pressed his thumb against the table. "I'm working for someone else now. In my field, but it's not what I planned." "No. My mother—" He stopped. "She doesn't know I'm here. She'd tell me this was humiliating." "Is it?" Emma asked. He looked at her. "No. Coming here is the least humiliating thing I've done in months." He paused. "The most humiliating thing I've done is everything that led to needing to come here." That landed with a weight that Emma allowed herself to feel. Not because it changed anything, it didn't, not in the ways that mattered, but because it was a real thing, said by a real person, and she had always believed that real things deserved to be acknowledged, even when they weren't enough. "I need you to know," she said, "that I accept what you just said. I hear that you understand. I hear that you're sorry." She held his gaze. "And it doesn't change my answer." He nodded. He had expected that. She could see that he had expected it. "I'm not angry at you, Daniel. I want you to know that too. I'm not sitting here with a list of things I want you to feel badly about. I just know I know with the kind of certainty that I've earned through a lot of hard years that going back isn't something I'm going to do, not because I can't forgive you, but because forgiveness is not the same as returning, and I am a completely different person now than the one you handed divorce papers to, and honestly so are you, and those two people don't make sense together. She breathed. We never quite did. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of something being understood at last, and understanding, even when it arrives late and costs too much, is still worth something. Is there anything you need? She asked. Practically, do you need anything? He looked at her like she had said something in a language he was still translating. No, he said. I needed to look at you and say it. Okay, she said. Then you've done what you came to do. He stood. She stood. They were two people who had spent 7 years sharing a life and were now standing on opposite sides of a table in a conference room that belonged to her, and the distance between them was exactly the right distance. Take care of yourself, Emma said. You too, he said. And then, I always believed you were capable of more than I saw. I didn't look hard enough. She walked him to this elevator. She pressed the button. She waited with him because it was the courteous thing to do, and Emma Carter had always been courteous without requiring the other person to deserve it. When the elevator opened, he stepped in. He turned to face her. She said, "Live better, Daniel. That's the only thing I ever actually wanted from you." The doors closed. She stood in the elevator bay for exactly 3 seconds, and then she turned and walked back toward the stairs, because the stairs were faster, and she had a 4 o'clock meeting with the Foundation's legal team, and an inbox that had not gotten any shorter while she was downstairs, having one of the most important conversations of her life. Patricia was waiting at the top of the stairs with a fresh coffee, and the expression of a woman who had correctly guessed how the meeting had gone without being told. 4 o'clock is in Conference B, Patricia said, and your father called while you were downstairs. What did he want? He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell her I'm fine and she doesn't need to worry about me, but also could she call me back when she gets a chance? Because I may have agreed to something with the Tokyo office without checking with her first." Emma stopped walking. She looked at Patricia. He did what? Tokyo office, Patricia confirmed. He didn't give me specifics. Emma took the coffee. She pulled out her phone. She dialed her father as she walked, and when he picked up, she said before he could offer a greeting, "What did you agree to with Tokyo?" "Well," her father said in the particular tone of a man who knew he had overstepped and was not remotely ashamed of it. "Here's the thing." She walked into the 4 o'clock meeting 12 minutes late, which was notable because Emma Carter had not been late to a single meeting since the day she arrived. The legal team looked up. She set her coffee down. "My father," she said by way of explanation, "is going to be the end of me." The lawyers who had all dealt with William Carter at various points in their careers nodded with the deep, experienced solidarity of people who understood completely. And then they got to work. The days accumulated the way they do when you are genuinely occupied, not quickly in the shallow sense where you're too busy to feel anything but quickly, in the way that happens when the work is real and the stakes are real and the person doing it has stopped splitting themselves between who they are and who they're pretending to be. Emma was not pretending anymore. She had stopped pretending a long time ago, actually, back in that dining room with the pen in her hand and the red dot blinking and the silence in her chest. That was not silence at all, but something much larger. The sound of a woman finally deciding that she had been small long enough. The Carter Foundation's first major public initiative under her leadership launched on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after she arrived. It was a workforce development program targeting 300 people in 2 cities, all of them over the age of 50, all of them displaced from industries that had changed too fast to include them in the new version. Emma stood at the back of the room during the launch event and watched people file in, people who looked like Sandra, her old manager, people who looked like the women she had worked beside at the retail store, people who had spent decades building knowledge and skill sets that the economy had reclassified as obsolete without asking them first. And she felt something that was not satisfaction, because satisfaction is too small a word for what happens when the work you're doing is connected to something you have lived. She felt like herself, completely, finally, without reservation. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A text from Claire. "I just read the piece in the business section. They put your photo above the fold." Above the fold. Emma. "I am going to need you to explain to me how you are this calm." Emma smiled. She typed back, "Meet me for dinner Friday," Claire responded in 4 seconds. "I already have a reservation. I made it after I read the article." Emma put her phone away. She turned her attention back to the room, to the people, to the 300 faces that were about to have something real offered to them by a foundation that finally understood what it was for. She stayed for the whole event. She shook every hand. She looked at every face. And she did not think once about the dining table or the papers or the pen. She was done with that room. She was right here in this one. The dinner with Claire happened on a Friday evening, and it lasted 4 hours, which was exactly the right amount of time for two women who had been best friends for 6 years and had just discovered that one of them had been sitting on a secret the size of a small country. Claire arrived first. She was already at the table when Emma walked in, and she stood up immediately, and the look on her face was not the starstruck, slightly overwhelmed expression Emma had been bracing for. It was just Claire, her Claire, the one who had cried on the phone the morning of the divorce, who had threatened Lauren with an address, and meant it looking at her with the full, unvarnished affection of someone who has decided that the facts of a situation are less important than the person at the center of it. "You look different," Claire said by way of greeting. "Different how?" "Like yourself." Claire sat back down. "That sounds simple, but you know what I mean." Emma sat. "I think I do." They ordered. They talked. Claire asked questions not about the company, not about the money, not about any of the things that most people would have led with, but about William, about the hospital, about what it had felt like to walk back into a building she had left 8 years earlier as a different version of herself. She asked what the office smelled like. She asked whether Emma's father cried when he saw her. She asked what Emma had eaten for breakfast on the first day. Emma answered every question. When the food came, Claire said, "Tell me about Daniel coming to the office." Emma had told her on the phone briefly. She told her again now in more detail, and Claire listened the way she always listened, actively, with her whole face. "He said he always believed you were capable of more," Claire said when Emma finished. "That's interesting." "Interesting how?" "Because believing someone is capable of more and actually treating them like it are two completely different things." Claire stabbed something on her plate. "You can hold a belief in a drawer and never use it. That's not a virtue. That's just a fact you kept to yourself while you acted the opposite way." Emma looked at her. "That's exactly right." "I know it is." Claire pointed her fork. "Don't let him make that into something generous. It wasn't generous. It was too little and too late, and also done in retrospect, which is the easiest time to see the truth. You were too comfortable to see when it actually mattered." "I'm not letting him," Emma said. I closed the door. "Okay." Claire set her fork down. "Good." She picked up her glass. "Now, tell me about the Tokyo thing your father did." Emma exhaled. "He agreed to a joint investment partnership with a tech development group in Tokyo without consulting me, which he is technically still within his rights to do because the official transfer of executive authority is still being processed by the legal team, but which was also very clearly a power move designed to remind me that he is still William Carter and has opinions about the direction of the company." Claire stared at her. "Is it a good deal?" "Honestly, it's an excellent deal." "Then why are you annoyed?" "Because he didn't tell me first," Claire smiled. "Welcome to having a father again." Emma opened her mouth, closed it, picked up her own glass. "I hate that you're right." "You love that I'm right. It's why we're friends." They stayed until the restaurant started turning over tables around them, which was the clearest possible signal, and even then they lingered on the sidewalk outside for 20 minutes, talking about nothing important and everything real. When they finally separated, Claire held on to the hug a beat longer than usual. "I'm proud of you," Claire said into Emma's shoulder. "Not because of the company or the foundation or any of that, just because of who you decided to be when everything was the hardest." Emma held on. "Thank you for not treating me differently." "You're Emma," Claire said simply. "You were always Emma. The rest is just context." The car ride back was quiet, and Emma let it be quiet. Let the city move past the windows and let the night be exactly what it was, ordinary in the best possible sense, full of the small, unglamorous peace that comes when you are finally living the life that actually belongs to you. She had been back 3 months when the gala invitation arrived. The Meridian Charitable Trust held its annual fundraising gala every November, and it was one of those events that occupied a specific tier of the social and philanthropic calendar, not the flashiest, not the most photographed, but attended by people whose signatures on checks actually moved things. The Carter Foundation had been a partner of the Meridian Trust for 11 years. The invitation was expected. Emma had already known she would attend. What she had not known, and what Patricia delivered with the careful neutrality of someone sharing information that has a loaded edge, was that Daniel Brooks was on the guest list. He's attending as a +1, Patricia said. His firm is a lower-tier sponsor. He registered 3 weeks ago. Emma looked at the invitation on her desk. And you're telling me this now because the gala is in 2 weeks and I wanted you to have time to decide how you want to handle it. Your table placement, your arrival time, whether you want... Patricia. Emma looked up. I'm going to the gala. I'm going to do my job at the gala. Daniel Brooks being in the same room is not an event. It's just a fact. Patricia nodded once and that was that. But the knowledge sat with her in a way she hadn't expected. Not with dread, she was well past dread, but with something that required attention, the way a splinter requires attention. Not because it's serious, but because it's present, and the body doesn't lie about presence. She called her father that evening. The Meridian Gala, she said. I know, he said immediately. Patricia called me. Patricia. She was worried about you. I don't need anyone worried about me. No, William said. You don't. But people who care about you will worry anyway. That's not something you can control, and it's not something you should want to. A pause. How are you actually feeling about it? Emma was quiet for a moment. I'm fine, she said. Emma. I'm genuinely fine, Dad. I'm not bracing for it. I'm not dreading it. I'm not... She stopped. There's this thing that happens when you run into someone who hurt you in a public setting where you have 2 choices. You can be the person who runs into someone who hurt them, or you can just be yourself, and the fact that they're there is incidental. She paused. I'm choosing the second one. William was quiet for a moment. Your mother used to say something like that. Emma hadn't expected that. She never expected it when he mentioned her mother because he did it rarely and always with a kind of careful gravity, like lifting something fragile. What did she say? Emma asked. She said that the best revenge on anyone who underestimated you was simply to fill the room, not to perform, not to make a point, just to be so fully yourself that there was no space left for their version of you. Emma sat with that. She was smarter than both of us, she said. Significantly, William agreed. The 2 weeks moved fast, the way weeks move when they're full. The Foundation's second program launch in that period was a healthcare access initiative in a rural county 4 hours from the city, a place where the nearest hospital was 45 minutes away, and the nearest specialist was a flight where people had been making impossible decisions about their health for years because the infrastructure had simply never reached them. Emma had driven out for the site visit she had scheduled with Dr. Washington, and she had sat in a community center and listened to people talk about their situations with the matter-of-fact resignation of those who have long since stopped expecting things to change. She had driven back in the dark and called Richard from the car. I want to accelerate the healthcare initiative timeline, she said. By how much? 6 months. Richard made the sound of a man doing mental calculations at speed. That's aggressive. It's necessary, Emma said. These people have already waited too long. Every month we spend on process is another month someone drives 45 minutes to an ER for something that could have been caught in a clinic. She heard the firmness in her own voice and recognized it. It was the same voice her father used when he had decided something and was informing people rather than asking them. What do we need to make it work? More staff on the implementation team and probably an outside contractor for the facility build-out. Find them. Move the budget if you need to. Send me a revised plan by Thursday. Thursday, Richard confirmed. She hung up. She drove. The dark moved past her, and she thought about the people in that community center. And she thought about her mother, whom she barely remembered, but had inherited something essential from the thing that made it impossible to know about a problem and walk past it. The gala was on a Saturday in the 3rd week of November. Emma arrived at 7:30, which was not early and not late arrival time being another statement, and hers was, I am here because I belong here, not because I am trying to prove that I do. The room was large and full of people who were dressed for the particular performance of a philanthropic event, the costumes of generosity. Claire would have called it, slightly uncharitably, and not entirely inaccurately. Emma accepted a glass of water from a passing server and moved through the room the way she moved through every room at her own pace, making eye contact, stopping when someone had something real to say, and moving when they didn't. She talked to the director of the Meridian Trust, a woman named Helen Marsh, who had built the organization from a regional charity into a nationally recognized institution over 20 years, and who shook Emma's hand with the grip of someone who does not give their respect easily and wants you to know when you've earned it. Your father told me you'd be formidable, Helen said. He oversells everything, Emma said. I undersold, Helen said, and moved on, and Emma took that with her like a small, specific piece of armor. She was in conversation with 2 foundation directors near the east side of the room when she saw Daniel. I was across the space standing with a small group, and he saw her at almost exactly the same moment she saw him. She knew because she watched his posture change a slight adjustment. The physical vocabulary of someone who has just registered something significant in their immediate environment. He looked at her. She looked at him. She gave him a single nod. Courteous. Clear. The kind of nod that contains everything necessary and nothing extra. Then she returned her attention to the conversation she was already in. That was all. That was the whole of it. The woman standing beside Daniel, not Sophia, someone else, someone. Emma didn't recognize, touched his arm and said something, and Emma didn't watch what happened next because it wasn't hers to watch. She was done watching things that didn't belong to her anymore. The keynote was at 9. Emma had known she was presenting. She had agreed to it 3 weeks earlier when Helen asked, because the Carter Foundation's new healthcare initiative was being highlighted as part of the evening's program. She had prepared remarks, had read them twice, and revised them once, and had then set them aside because she had never been good at reading prepared remarks, and had always been better at simply knowing what she wanted to say and saying it. She stepped to the podium at 9:15. The room quieted. She looked out at the faces, hundreds of them people of various degrees of importance and influence. People who had read the Marcus Webb profile and formed opinions about her based on what the words suggested, people who had known her father for decades and were waiting to see what his daughter actually was. And somewhere in that room in the middle distance was a man who had handed her divorce papers 8 months ago and told her she had never been enough. She did not look for him. She looked at the room, all of it, the whole of it, and she began. She talked about the county 4 hours away. She talked about the community center and the people she had sat with and what they had said about their lives and what they had stopped expecting. She talked about what the Carter Foundation was going to build there and why, and she talked about it the way you talk about something when you have actually been to the place and sat in the room and looked at the people, not in abstractions, not in statistics, but in specifics, in faces and voices, and the particular dignity of people who have been asking for basic things for a long time and have not yet given up on being heard. The room was completely still. She talked for 9 minutes. When she finished, the applause started before she had stepped back from the podium, and it was not the polite, automatic applause of an audience executing a social obligation. It was the kind that has some weight behind it. Helen Marsh caught her eye from the side of the room and gave her a single nod. Emma stepped away from the podium. She was crossing back toward the main reception area when she heard her name. Not Patricia, not Helen, not any of the people she had been speaking with all evening. Victoria Brooks. Emma turned. Daniel's mother was standing 6 feet away, and she looked different, was not quite the right word because the fundamental architecture of Victoria was unchanged. The careful presentation, the expensive clothes, the expression that had always reminded Emma of something polished and deliberately impenetrable. But there was something else in it tonight, something Emma had never seen in Victoria's face in 7 years of trying. Discomfort. "Emma," Victoria said again. "Victoria," Emma said. A pause that had real weight to it. Victoria said, "I owe you something." Emma waited. "I was unkind to you," Victoria said. "Over many years. I dismissed you, and I encouraged my son to dismiss you, and I did it because I thought—" She stopped, restarted. "I thought I knew what was valuable and what wasn't. I thought I could see everything that mattered about a person from the outside." Another pause. "I was wrong." Emma looked at her steadily. "The morning of the divorce," Victoria continued, her voice lower now. "I sat at your table and I thought I was watching something be correctly resolved. I thought Daniel was finally—" She stopped again, and this time the stop was longer, and Emma could see that whatever was happening inside Victoria was not easy. "I was there for him, but I was also there because I wanted to see you leave. And I need you to know that I understand now that was cruel," Emma said quietly. Not as an accusation, as a fact offered simply. Victoria met her eyes. "Yes. You had a front-row seat to the worst morning of my life," Emma said, "and you were smiling." Victoria did not look away. That was something. "I was." "Okay," Emma said. "That's—" Victoria seemed to have expected something different. "That's your response. You told me the truth. I heard it. That matters." Emma held her gaze. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right because it wasn't, but I'm also not going to carry your guilt for you, Victoria. That's yours," she breathed. "I genuinely hope Daniel is doing better. I genuinely hope your family finds its footing. That's the truest thing I can tell you. Victoria looked at her for a long moment, and what moved through her face was something complicated, not quite tears, but the structure of a person on the edge of something they had been building toward for a long time. "You're extraordinary," Victoria said, and it was the first real thing she had ever said to Emma, the first one without an agenda behind it. "I know," Emma said simply, not with arrogance, with the same factual steadiness she brought to everything. "I always was." She turned and walked back into the room. Patricia found her 12 minutes later with a fresh glass of water and the expression of someone who had been keeping an eye on things from a respectful distance. "How did that go?" Patricia asked. "Fine," Emma said. "You're sure?" "Patricia." Emma looked at her. "I am the granddaughter of a woman who built a school from scratch in a town that said she couldn't. I am the daughter of a man who built an empire from an idea and an early morning. I stood at a table 8 months ago and signed away 7 years with a steady hand, and I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror." She paused. "A conversation with my ex-mother-in-law in a ballroom is not going to be the thing that undoes me." Patricia was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "Your father is going to be so annoying about how well you're doing." Emma took the water glass. "He already is." The gala wound down after 11, and Emma stayed until the proper end, not because she needed to make a point, but because she was genuinely engaged, because Helen Marsh had introduced her to 3 people worth knowing, and the conversations had been real, and because Emma Carter did not leave rooms early, simply because a room had once also held someone who had hurt her. She left when she was ready to leave. The car was waiting and the night was cold and clear, and she sat in the back and let the city pass, and she thought about what Victoria had said. Not about the apology itself. Apologies from people who had been cruel for a long time are not the most reliable currency, but about the fact of it. The fact that Victoria had sought her out, had stood in front of her in a room full of important people, and had said, "I was wrong about you." That was not nothing. That was actually quite a lot from a woman who had spent 7 years doubling down. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from William. "I heard the keynote went well. Gerald Oakes called me. You know Gerald only calls when something impresses him." She typed back, "Gerald needs to stop calling you about my meetings." He responded, "Gerald needs a hobby. You were magnificent. Don't argue with me." She put the phone in her bag. She looked out the window at the city moving past, lit up and layered and full of 10,000 lives being lived simultaneously, each one containing its own particular version of what she had just come through, its own rooms and tables and papers and pens and mornings of walking out without looking back. She thought about the county 4 hours away. She thought about the people in that community center. She thought about this program launching in 6 months, the clinics that would be built, the appointments that would be made, the diagnoses caught early enough to change the ending. She thought about her mother, whom she barely remembered, who had apparently once said, "Fill the room." Emma Carter had filled the room. She had filled every room she had entered since the morning she drove away from a house that had never quite been a home, and she was only getting started. Part 5. The healthcare clinic in Reedsville County opened on a Tuesday morning in April, and Emma was there before the staff arrived. She had driven out the night before, checked into the only motel in the county seat, eaten dinner at a diner where the waitress recognized her from the newspaper and tried not to make a big deal of it, and absolutely made a big deal of it, and gone to bed early with the particular quiet anticipation of someone who knows tomorrow is going to matter. She was standing outside the building at 6:45 when Dr. Anita Washington pulled up, got out of her car, saw Emma, and stopped walking. "You came early," Anita said. "I wanted to see it before the day started," Emma said, "before it becomes official and documented and photographed. I wanted to see it when it was still just real." Anita looked at her for a moment. "You know, I've worked with a lot of foundation people over the years," she said. "Most of them show up for the ribbon cutting. You showed up the night before." "The ribbon cutting is for the cameras," Emma said. "The night before is for me." They stood together in the early morning quiet, 2 women looking at a building that had not existed 6 months ago, that existed now, because Emma had sat in a community center and listened, and then driven back in the dark and called Richard and said, "Accelerate the timeline. This is necessary." The day unfolded, the way important days unfold, when they have been carefully built, not perfectly, because nothing important ever goes perfectly, but with the solid, forward-moving energy of something that is fundamentally right. There were staff introductions and equipment walkthroughs and a brief ceremony that Emma kept deliberately short because the people of Reedsville County had not waited this long to watch speeches. They had waited to be seen and served and taken seriously, and the best thing Emma could do was get out of the way of that happening. The first patient was a 73-year-old man named Earl Tipton, who had driven 18 miles because his regular doctor had retired 2 years ago, and the nearest replacement was 40 minutes away, and he had a knee that had been troubling him for 8 months, and he hadn't had it looked at, because by the time he factored in the gas and the time and the copay, it had always seemed like too much of an ordeal. Emma watched Earl check in at the front desk. She watched the intake coordinator, a young woman named Jess, who had been hired from the county itself, which had been one of Emma's specific requirements, greet him with the warmth of someone who understood that the man across the counter was not a patient number, but a person who had been managing alone for too long. She did not introduce herself to Earl. It was not her moment. It was his. She drove back to the city that afternoon with 4 hours of highway ahead of her and called her father from the road. "It opened," she said. "I know," William said. "Richard sent me the morning update." "Of course he did." "Earl Tipton," William said. 73, knee. "Dad, I'm proud, Emma. Let me be proud." She let him be proud. She listened to him talk about Earl Tipton's knee with the same gravity he brought to international investment decisions, and she thought, this is what the money is actually for. Not the buildings, not the portfolio, not the press profiles. This. Earl Tipton driving 18 miles because now there was somewhere to go. She was back in the office by 7 and at her desk by 7:15 and in the middle of the Tokyo Partnership briefing by 7:30 because the clinic opening was real and important and she had been fully present for it, and now there was other work and she was fully present for that too. This was the thing she had discovered about herself in these months, not the capacity for leadership, which she had always suspected was there, but the capacity to be entirely in one thing and then entirely in the next thing without dragging the previous moment forward as a weight. She was learning, in other words, how to be free. The Tokyo Partnership turned out to be exactly as good as William had made it sound from his hospital bed, which Emma told him grudgingly, and which he received with exactly the smugness she had expected. "You could just say I was right," he said. "I could," Emma said. "I'm choosing not to." "You are so much like your mother." "Thank you," she said, because she had decided to receive that as the greatest compliment available. It was Richard who brought the news about Lauren Brooks on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, delivered in the same efficient neutral tone he used for everything, not because he was indifferent. Emma had come to understand, but because Richard's neutrality was a form of respect. He gave information clean without editorial and let her decide what to feel about it. "Lauren Brooks posted a video," he said, setting his tablet on her desk. Emma looked at the screen. It was a long video, 22 minutes, posted to the same social media account that had once filmed Emma's humiliation on the morning of the divorce. Lauren was sitting in what appeared to be her apartment, without the usual polish of her produced content. Her hair not quite arranged, her eyes slightly swollen in the way that eyes get when a person has been crying before they decide to do something difficult. She had titled it, "I Was Wrong and I Filmed It." Emma watched 3 minutes of it. She didn't need more than 3 minutes to understand the shape of it, Lauren speaking directly to camera, talking about the morning of the divorce, about the phone she had held up, about the red dot, about the audience she had been anticipating, the comments she had imagined, the satisfaction she had expected, and instead felt something complicated and wrong about in the quiet that came after Emma walked out. She talked about watching Emma's story unfold publicly over the past months. She talked about what it felt like to know that the person she had filmed in a moment of deliberate cruelty was the same person now on the front page of business publications funding clinics and educational programs and workforce initiatives. She did not make excuses. She said, "I was wrong. I was cruel. I participated in something that was designed to humiliate someone who had done nothing to deserve it, and I have to live with that." Emma stopped the video. She was quiet for a moment. Richard waited. "Has anyone asked me to respond?" Emma said. "3 journalists," Richard said, "and a podcast. Tell them I have no comment on Ms. Brooks's personal content. And if they press, tell them I said something gracious and move on." Emma handed the tablet back. "She made the video for herself, not for me. The correct response is to let her have it." Richard nodded. He started to leave. "Richard," he turned. "How are the Reedsville numbers looking first week intake? 214 patients," he said, versus a projected 160 for the first week. Emma allowed herself one moment of something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. "Good. Keep me updated." He left. She turned back to her desk, and the day continued. The thing about closure, the real kind, not the performed kind, is that it doesn't arrive as an event. It doesn't come with a moment and a soundtrack and a clear before and after line. It comes as an accumulation. It comes in the Tuesday mornings when you are standing outside a building you caused to exist, and the Wednesday afternoons when a video plays on a tablet, and you feel genuinely that the person in it is working something out that has nothing to do with you. It comes in the Friday dinners that last 4 hours, and the phone calls with a father who survived a cardiac event and calls you every evening with opinions about Tokyo and questions about your breakfast. It comes eventually like weather that has finally changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily until one day you realize you are not bracing anymore. Emma realized it on a Saturday in May. She was at her father's house. He had been cleared for light activity and was using light activity as permission to redecorate 2 rooms simultaneously and argue with his home nurse about his sodium intake, and they were eating lunch in the kitchen, which was the room in that house that had always felt most like just a room rather than a statement. And William was talking about a conservation partnership the foundation was being approached about, when Emma said, interrupting him mid-sentence, "I'm happy, Dad." He stopped. He looked at her. She hadn't planned to say it. It wasn't even that the moment called for it particularly. He was in the middle of talking about wetland restoration, which was not a natural segue. But it was true, and it was the truest things that tend to arrive without scheduling themselves. "I know," William said after a moment. "I wanted to say it out loud. To you. I'm glad you did." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers briefly, the gesture of a parent who has watched their child come through something and does not have adequate language for the relief of it. "Your mother would have been—" He stopped. "She would have sat at this table and watched you this past year, and she would have been unable to stop talking about it for weeks." Emma laughed. The laugh was full and real. "She sounds exhausting." "She was magnificent," William said. "Every single day." They sat in that for a while, just the two of them in the kitchen of a house that was also finally just a room eating lunch on a Saturday in May, with the easy, uncomplicated warmth of people who have earned their way back to each other. His name was James Calloway. James was 41. He had grown up in the South, had come north for law school, had stayed because the work was here, and the work was what mattered to him. He was not flashy. He was not the kind of man who entered a room loudly or made his presence known through performance. I was the kind of man who listened before he spoke, and who, when he spoke, said things that had been worth the wait. He and Emma had talked for 40 minutes at the round table, mostly about the wetland project, partly about a legal precedent from 8 years earlier that both of them had followed for different professional reasons, and once briefly genuinely about what it felt like to do work that connected to something real. "Most of the time in law," he said, "you are managing the distance between what should be and what is. You're filling in that gap with language, and sometimes you do it well, and sometimes the gap is too wide and the language isn't enough." He paused. "Conservation work is different. The gap between what should be and what is, you can actually close it. You can take a piece of land that's being destroyed, and you can write the agreements that protect it, and then go back 5 years later and see the marsh grass and the birds and the water quality numbers, and it's real, in a way that a lot of legal work just isn't." Emma had looked at him and thought, this is someone who got into the work for the right reasons and stayed there. She said, "That's exactly how I feel about the foundation." He looked at her. "I know. I read the Marcus Webb piece." A pause. "I also heard you speak at the Meridian Gala. I was there." "What did you think?" "I thought you were the most real person in that room," he said, which is not a small thing in a room like that. She had gone home that evening and told Claire on the phone about James Calloway. Claire's response was immediate. "What does he look like, Claire?" "I'm asking for relevant data, Emma." He's kind-looking," Emma said. "He looks like someone whose face tells the truth." A pause. "That's the best description of attractiveness I've ever heard," Claire said. "And I mean that seriously." Emma had smiled at the wall of her apartment. He mentioned the Meridian Gala. "How was at the gala?" "Apparently. The same gala where Daniel was also present." "Yes. So while Daniel was somewhere in that room being the person who made the worst decision of his life, this man was also in the room, watching you give a speech, thinking you were the most real person there." Emma hadn't thought about it that way. She did now. "That's a very satisfying piece of information," she said. "It really is," Claire agreed. James called 2 days after the roundtable, not to ask her to dinner, not yet, but to follow up on a specific legal point they had discussed regarding the wetland partnership, which was absolutely a legitimate professional reason to call, and which was also, Emma understood from the length and the texture of the conversation, more than that. They talked for an hour. He called again the following week. By the third call, they had moved well past the wetland project and into the territory of conversations that have their own momentum, that keep finding new ground to cover, because both people involved are genuinely interested in what the other person has to say. He asked her to dinner on a Thursday. She said yes without hesitation, and without the internal negotiating she had expected to do the part of herself that had been hurt enough to be careful. The carefulness was there. She was not naive. She was not going to pretend that 7 years with someone who underestimated her had left no marks. But underneath the carefulness was something that felt cleaner and more reliable. A sense that she knew herself now. That the version of her who sat across a table from someone new was not the version who had hidden in a marriage waiting to be seen. She had been seen. She had seen herself. And she was bringing that into the room. Dinner was on a Friday. It was excellent. It lasted 3 hours and ended on the sidewalk with the city noise around them, and a natural, comfortable pause that felt like the end of a chapter and the beginning of something else. "I'd like to do this again," James said. "So would I," Emma said. She did not make it more complicated than that. She told her father about James on a Sunday call, which she had come to think of as their weekly download. The structured version of the ongoing conversation that was their relationship, now rebuilt carefully and genuinely over the past year into something that neither of them had quite had before, a friendship that sat beneath the parent-child structure and was in some ways more sustaining. "An environmental lawyer," William said. "Yes. Wetland restoration, among other things." "Is he good at it?" "He's excellent at it," Emma said. "I've read 3 of his cases." A pause. "You read his cases?" It seemed like useful information. "Emma." There was warmth in her father's voice. "That is the most Carter thing you have ever said." She laughed. "Don't make it weird, Dad." "I'm your father. Everything is at least a little weird." What grew between Emma and James grew the way real things grow, not with the accelerated, compressed passion of something that is trying to make up for time, but with the steady, unhurried pace of 2 people who have both learned through different roads that the things worth building don't need to be rushed. He knew who she was from the beginning. There was no version of this that required hiding, and that the absence of the need to hide was something Emma had not fully understood. She had been waiting for until it was simply present, the way you don't fully feel the weight of something you've been carrying until you put it down. She could be Emma Carter, fully, at all times, in all directions. She could talk about the foundation and the clinic and the Tokyo partnership and the wetland restoration and her father's opinions about sodium and Claire's opinions about everything else, and she could also just sit in comfortable quiet over a meal with someone who was content to be in the same space without requiring the space to be filled. She had not known quiet could feel like that. She had lived with Daniel for 7 years, and the quiet had always been pressurized, always had something coiled in it, the tension of a marriage that was working too hard to sustain itself. This was different. This was quiet, that was just quiet, easy, and undemanding, the kind that comes when 2 people don't have anything to prove to each other. The board of Carter Enterprises voted in June to formalize Emma's role as president and chief executive, which was the legal completion of a process that had been underway since she arrived, and which William had been orchestrating with his particular brand of patient strategic precision since well before Emma had agreed to come home. The vote was 11-1. Gerald Oakes voted yes and called William immediately after to say so. Emma was in her office when Richard brought her the news, and she sat with it for a moment, the full weight of it, the title and the responsibility and the legitimacy conferred by 11 votes in a room full of people who had started out expecting her to be ornamental. She thought about the retail floor. She thought about Sandra, her old manager, who had told her she was too good for the place. She thought about this dining table and the papers and the pen, and she thought about the drive away and the flight to the hospital, and the first day with the parking pass and the badge and all the days after. 11 votes. She called her father. "I know," he said immediately. "I've been waiting for you to call." "Did you orchestrate this?" "I set up the conditions," he said. "You did the rest." "That's a very careful distinction." "I'm a very careful man." A pause. "How do you feel?" Emma looked out the window of her office with its organized chaos of annotated pages and foundation files, and a photograph of the Reedsville clinic that Jess, the intake coordinator, had sent her the week after opening. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. "Not because of the title, because of what it means to do the work." "Yes," William said simply. "That's exactly right." She hosted a small gathering that weekend, not a celebration in the formal sense, just the people who had been real with her through all of it. Claire, who arrived 40 minutes early and immediately started rearranging the snacks in a way that was objectively better. Richard, who came with his wife and spent most of the evening talking to James about an environmental case he had followed for years and had questions about. Patricia, who brought wine that was excellent and would not tell Emma what it cost. Dr. Anita Washington, who drove in from across the city and hugged Emma with both arms before she even said hello. James stood beside Emma for most of the evening, not in a possessive way, not in a performative way, but in the way of someone who is comfortable in his own presence and is genuinely glad to be in yours. At one point, Claire pulled Emma into the kitchen on the pretense of needing help with something, and then stood in front of her and said, "I like him." "I know," Emma said. "I'm not just saying it, I genuinely like him. He asked me 3 questions about my work tonight. Not small talk questions, real questions. Who does that? A person who is actually interested," Emma said. "Exactly." Claire pointed at her. "Don't let him go." "Claire, I'm serious. I'm aware." Claire hugged her then, suddenly fiercely, the way she had hugged her the night of the divorce call when they had stayed on the phone for 3 hours, and Claire had cried, and Emma had been steadier than she had any right to be. "I'm so glad you're okay," Claire said. "More than okay," Emma said. "More than okay," Claire agreed. "That's better. That's what I needed to hear." The letter from Daniel arrived in July. Not a call, not a text, not a message through the company line. An actual letter handwritten mailed to the Carter Foundation address, which was public record. Patricia brought it to Emma on a Tuesday morning with the same careful neutrality she brought to everything, and Emma took it and set it on the corner of her desk and did not open it until the end of the day when the office was quiet and the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in summer, and she was alone. She opened it. It was 2 pages. The handwriting was Daniel's. She recognized it, the specific architecture of his letters, the way he pressed slightly harder at the beginning of words and lighter at the end, something she had spent 7 years watching on grocery lists and birthday cards and sticky notes left on the refrigerator. He wrote about the year, about what it had looked like from his side, the collapse of the startup Sophia, leaving the slow and uncomfortable process of understanding that the life he had been building toward had been built on a foundation of other people's assessments rather than his own. He wrote about his mother. He wrote that Victoria had told him about the conversation at the gala, and that it had been the most honest accounting of herself he had ever heard from her, and that something had shifted in the family because of it, not fixed, not resolved, but shifted. He wrote, "I don't have anything to ask you for. I know that chapter is closed, and I know that's the right thing. I just needed to tell you that watching what you've built this year, reading about it, hearing about it, seeing what the foundation is doing, I understand now what I had. Not the name, not the money. You. I had you, and I was too small to see it." He wrote, "I'm working on being less small. I don't know if I'll get there, but I'm trying." The last line said, "Thank you for being the kind of person who is worth being wrong about." Emma folded the letter carefully. She put it back in the envelope. She sat with it for the long time in the quiet of her office, and she felt every layer of what was there to feel, the old grief present but distant, the way an old scar is present but not painful. Something that might have been forgiveness, not the performed kind, but the genuine article, the kind that lives in your body as a lightness rather than in your words as a declaration. And underneath everything steady and clear and completely unambiguous, the knowledge that she was right here in this life, which was hers, which she had built from the wreckage of a dining table and a pen, and a morning when everyone in the room had expected her to fall apart. She had not fallen apart. She had driven away. She had flown home. She had walked into a building with a parking pass and a badge and no announcement, and done the work every single day with the full weight of who she was and what she had learned and what she refused to stop believing about the connection between resources and responsibility, between power and purpose, between who you are in private and who you become when the world finally looks. She picked up her phone. She texted James dinner Thursday. He responded in under a minute, already looking forward to it. She smiled. She put the phone down. She picked up the foundation report she had been reviewing before Patricia brought the letter, and she returned her attention to it because there was work to do, and she was the person who did it. And that was not a burden or an obligation, but simply plainly the truest thing about her. In Reedsville County, Earl Tipton's knee was healing. In 4 cities, 300 people were building new skills in a workforce that had once written them off. In 11 states, programs that had been underfunded for years were finally receiving what they needed to do, what they had always been designed to do. And in a corner office in a building that bore her family's name, Emma Carter sat with a letter she would keep, and a report she was reading, and a life she had chosen, not because it was given to her, not because she had been returned to it by circumstance or by someone else's recognition of her value, but because she had walked toward it one decision at a time, with clear eyes and steady hands, and the unshakable certainty of a woman who had always known exactly who she was. She had simply been waiting for the world to catch up, and now it had, and she was not waiting for anything anymore.